Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, I am Adele Tan, and I'm a senior curator here at the National Gallery. And I will be your host and moderator for today. In case you guys are not familiar, you know that October Gathering is a major program at the gallery where we are trying to chart burgeoning issues in the field of Southeast Asian art, because we do have a permanent gallery here dedicated to scoping out the art histories of Southeast Asia. And so this festival is really a space to address and expand some of the critical themes and provocations. So in particular for me in convening this session under the rubric of Two Planets, is really for me, and also my colleague, or ex-colleague, Roger Nelson over there, to redress ideas or topics that have been expunged, in scare quotes. With that, I refer to the topics of love, sex, and desire. So we tend not to have very erotically charged narratives, didactics about the artworks that we have here at the gallery. So with regard to that, the title Two Planets is meant to reinvigorate conversations on the enduring but neglected relationships between also the literary, by that poetry, fiction, and theater, and the visual arts, and by the extension also visual culture. And as I've mentioned, it references artist Araya Ratchadamrungsuk's artwork of the same title, Two Planets, which is a 2008 video installation of the same name that crosses two disparate worlds, right? That of European art history and Thai rural life. And I'm really happy to have the artist here present today. And I'm sorry we didn't cross this with you previously about borrowing the title from your artwork. So as I've mentioned, this session centers on sexuality and desire, abiding earthy tropes that have hitherto remained unsurfaced and less examined in discourse in Asia. So I intend for Two Planets to be convivial but critical, and the lectures by two pairs of discussants. So today we have Chris and Pasuk, and then tomorrow we have Zarina Mohammed and Tini Aliman as a pair of artists doing a performance lecture with us. So they're all partners in more ways than one, and who will then touch on the role of body humor, body as in B-A-W-D-Y, humor, the workings of the unconscious in Southeast Asian art, learning from animal and plant life, and also looking at perhaps the limits and dangers of certain gendered or sexualized compositions. So without further ado, I want to introduce today's speakers, which is really quite, interesting for the gallery to have, because we're having social scientists amongst art history. Pasuk Phongpaichit is Emeritus Professor of Political Economy at Chulalongkorn University in Bangkok and a Fellow of the Royal Society of Thailand. Her research has ranged over corruption, the illegal economy, social welfare, and land governance. Chris Baker is a historian, former lecturer at Cambridge University, and a long-time resident of Thailand. And he has recently written on the history of law and on early mural painting. So Chris and Pasuk met at Cambridge University for over 40 years ago, and they have jointly written on many occasions on Thai history, political economy, and current affairs, including a history of Thailand, a history of Ayutthaya, Thaksin, and Thailand's boom and bust. And in 2017, they were awarded the Fukuoka Grand Prize for their contribution to Asian culture. I have to say that this is right now, there is a fourth edition already of A History of Thailand. And it also has a Thai language translation of this book, now in its 13th edition. This History of Thailand is, now a kind of gold standard reference book, if anyone wants a kind of quick rundown of A History of Thailand. And it's been the most successful journal book on Thai history for the modern period for both Thai and international readers. But that's not quite why we are having them here today, because most remarkably, they are social scientists who have ventured into the literary domain, and both have translated all Thai literary works, including The Tale of Kunchang Kunpang, 12 Months, and Lilith Pralo, as well as key works of other prominent Thai intellectuals. Their English translation of The Tale of Kunchang Kunpang, which took them 7 years of historical and linguistic research, won the Becker Prize, awarded by the Association of Asian Studies in 2013, and was cited as a tour de force that represented the greatest achievement to date in the field of Southeast Asian literary translation. So without much further ado, I'll hand over the stage to Chris and Pasuk. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming to listen to us. We are an economist and a historian, and we are 150 years old. Today, we are going to talk about poetry, painting, gender, sexuality, and politics. We are going to range across 500 years of history. In other words, we are going to stray a bit outside our comfort zone. We are talking about Siam, or Thailand, because that is what we know a bit about, but we don't think there is anything special, especially Thai, about the content. Desire is humanity. Humanity is desire. We will talk about how desire has been expressed in words and picture, how this has been denied, and how denial has been defied. We will start in the 18th century, looking at the portrayal of everyday life and female power. Then skip back to the earliest Thai poetry around 1500, and finally swoop forward to the present day. But first we go back around 300 years ago.
In a Buddhist wat, now near the center of Bangkok, there is a mural illustrating the Vidura Jataka, one of the tales of the Buddha's past lives, designed to give moral teaching. The plot of this tale is very complicated. There's a misunderstanding, then a lot of evil plotting, and as a result, an ogre with a magic horse is taking the Bodhisattva, the Buddha-to-be, up to the heavens to kill him. The Bodhisattva asks to pass by his family to say goodbye. Only a few centimeters away, a couple is pounding rice, which is a richly symbolic activity. And a boy behind him is about to lasso the man's exposed testicles. The boy's friend beside him is sniggering, and people at the back in neighboring houses looking on are covering their eyes in horror. In the next house, two pairs of tangled legs are seen through a window, and people, the neighbors, are all gathering around to look, listen, and gossip. And farther back in the same scene, there's a scantily dressed woman leaning on her hand in fatigue. What's she been up to? And across the road, sprawled in what's perhaps drunken sleep, are two men, or perhaps just two men sleeping together. There are many mysteries about this painting. It is in a rather small wat, which at that time was in a very remote area of orchards and nothing else. The Vidura story is usually illustrated with other scenes, particularly the ogre playing dice with the king, or the ogre throwing the bodhisattva off a mountain. And this tale is about truthfulness and loyalty, which are not represented in this painting at all. Most importantly, this humorous scene is not hidden away at all, but appears slap bang in the middle at eye height on one of the side walls. You can't miss it. Okay? So why? Okay, go on.
Why was this hilarious scene painted in such a prominent place? We cannot answer this question, but we can wonder about it. The painting was probably done in the 18th century, roughly 300 years ago. The painting of these murals began around this time, and this was an early example. The beginning of such a significant art form was a moment of cultural importance. What caused it? We can only guess by looking at the historical background and at what was painted. This was a time when the society was prospering and wealth spreading more widely in society. There was money around to sponsor this expensive new art form. New wealth was also creating social turmoil, revolts, conflict, corruption, banditry. Some people wanted to mobilize Buddhism to counter this turmoil. The walls of the temple were a space available for teaching. They were painted with Jataka tales and scenes from the life of the Buddha, which offered some example of living a good life. And the three worlds cosmology, which stressed the importance of social order in the Thai culture.
And the painters treated the interiors of these buildings like a single canvas, often in very, very dramatic designs, stressing the importance of their message. They also located the Buddha's life and previous lives in the contemporary landscape. In this scene, for example, we are just outside the place where the Buddha is being born. This is his mother holding up to clutch onto a tree as she is about to give birth to the Buddha. But in front of them, just outside the place where the Buddha is born, there's an absolutely charming family scene. Over on the left, there's a man hitting on a girl. Next to him is a mother suckling an infant. And over on the right, there's Granny is cooking something. And here, in another temple, around the scenes from the Buddha's life, there are vignettes of people doing all sorts of things, buying noodles, making a boat, playing music. And here are elephant drivers waiting for a ride, just like motorcycle taxi drivers in Bangkok today. These scenes close the mental distance between the scriptures and real life. The distance from these feet in the life of the Buddha, painted in traditional style, to the contemporary scene is 2,000 years and 2,000 miles, but here it's reduced to a few inches. At the same time, these scenes are a celebration of everyday life, including the everyday life of naughty children playing tricks and of people doing things behind closed doors. Similar scenes are found in most of the very few murals that survive from this early time 300 years ago. Clearly, when this was painted, the abbot, the monks, the patrons, and the local community all knew what was being painted, but they weren't left there, they were allowed to survive. And these scenes quietly state that sex and desire are part of that everyday life.
Now, we will talk a little bit about female power in the 18th century. We will stay in the same period, 300 years ago, but shift from pictures to words. The tale of Kunchang Kunpan is a long story that developed in an oral tradition of storytelling for local entertainment. Like much such popular entertainment, it's about romance and tragedy. Unlike all other literature of the time, the lead characters are ordinary people rather than gods and kings, and the telling is realistic. Most of the plot is built around everyday life, events of birth, marriages, sickness, deaths, personal conflicts, happiness, and sorrow. Today, we will concentrate on one aspect of the tale, what it tells about gender in pre-modern Siam. The story is a classic love triangle with two men and one beautiful woman. In all three families, the father died early. The child is brought up by a single mother. While this is a plot device, we think it also portrays what's going on at the time, the reality of the family in that age. Adult men who were rather loosely attached to the family, they had to go away on king errands for several months in a year. Many were also monks, traders, soldiers, or just going off for adventure. In the tale, two characters visit a village where only women are present. Nobody finds this strange, and nobody asks where are all the men. The family was thus very much a matter of women and children. Focus on the mother. The women thus had the responsibility for maintaining the family. They look after the farms, they educate the children, they run shops, they look after the family property, even in cases where the husband is around.
A Chinese visitor to Siam in the 15th century said, "All affairs are managed by their wives, both the king of the country and the common people. They all follow the decisions of their wives, for the mental capacity of the wives certainly exceeds that of the men." This was repeated by other visitors. In the 17th century, a French observer noted, "The women plough the land they sell and buy in the cities." And a Persian visitor said, "It is common for women to engage in buying and selling in the markets, and even to undertake physical labor." The women also had the responsibility of sustaining the family over time by finding a mate and having children. And the women in Kunshan Kumpan display an open, confident, and sometimes aggressive sexuality. Wantong, the female in the triangle, takes the lead in establishing the relationship with Kunpan. She does this while he is in the robes of a novice monk. She starts a flirtation by piling his alms bowl full with food. And when that happens, he says, "That's not the way. That's not the usual way to give alms."
Are you picking a quarrel? You'll end up with an empty stomach.
"You put in so much, I can't eat it. Do you think you can get away with this because you're pretty?"
Don't speak so much. Don't you know a novice is not supposed to talk while receiving alms? Haven't you read the disciplinary code? You aren't being bothered by my beauty, are you?
"Are you trying to tease me?"
Quieten down. Do you want to eat food or suck on a spoon? You are smart. Soon you'll be eating the wind. Then, when he is giving a recitation, she strips off her outer ruby red uppercloth and presents it as an offering in appreciation of his skill in the temple, in full view of the assembled local community. It works. Within days, he has left the monkhood and they are a couple. When her son meets the future wife in a gathering with both their fathers present, the two youngsters eye each other furtively, and the poem transports us into her thoughts and her desire. He has a bright face and cheeks like nutmeg. His lips look as if painted with rouge. His hair is cute as a lotus pod. Eyebrows curve like arrow. The black pupils of his eyes gleam like jet. A strong chest and curvy waist. Everything looks perfect. If he comes to lie with me for a night, I would gobble him up.
This open and confident display of desire is not confined to those in the bloom of youth. When soldiers are leaving for war, women, both young and old, gather for the spectacle.
Oh, sir, this young and going to war already.
Oh, such a pretty body. I'd not go to sleep at all.
I love to go to war with you, but the action would make my clothes filthy.
Widows fluttered their eyes at Kun Pen. He still looked brisk, galloping along with his legs in the stirrups, powerfully urging the horse ahead. I'd like to jump up in his saddle for a ride. And when the soldiers visit a market, the vendors, who are also quite aged, get into an argument over sex and age. Miss Ong calls out to Miss Fark,
He doesn't love widows. He will run away miles because your body can't compete. Aren't you ashamed to be bothering him?
Miss Fark replied, You've never made love, so what do you know? You young girls have got as much inner rhythm as a Lao corpse. When it comes to the tricks, watch out for us widows. A young chap like this is a pushover. Just tug his string and he'll tremble. And there's one other wonderful vignette on the power of female sexuality, irrespective of age. The moment of birth is a time of great risk and danger, and the role of the midwife is not only to manage the physical process, but to combat any malevolent spirits. So at the critical moment of birth, the aged midwife strips naked and dances to draw the attention of the malevolent spirits away from the mother and child.
So now we come to sexuality and power in the 15th century Siam. Now let's go back 500 years ago. In the old Siamese capital of Ayutthaya, probably in 1480s, a son of the reigning king began to write a poem about a lady he had lost. He continued writing the lament through 12 months, Tawa Tosamat, the name of the poem. It's a year-long haul of sorrow and despair. He added a preface of 15 verses to explain to his readers why he missed her so much. These verses are remarkable.
My soul young heart partner, surpassing words, best budding bloom, I touched, care caressed, embraced your body's beauty, supped the finest taste, and never left you lone past half a watch. I miss your special, soft, sensuous tongue that fired my heart and roused my lust. I miss your scent, your dulcet voice divine, flesh pressed on tender flesh to seem as one. I miss the times of roving like a Naga lord, my arms embracing, circling, coiling round the beauty of all beauties, passion's taste, deep loving, sliding, winding, folding tight. I miss caressing golden lotus, holy lake, dipping down past lily bud, parting petals wide. I miss cherishing the perfect flower's crown and prying part the world flower below Meru's mount. I miss the lovely lily, gem of lotus flowers, petals duly parting wide at watchbeat times, for bees to sup the taste and dip the golden lake, to slide inside and bathe in fragrant streams. This young royal also, in the course of the poem, he presides at several royal ceremonies. And in such events, his role would be to symbolize monarchy by performing some ritual formula. But instead, in the poem, he tells us what's in his mind. So during a ritual boat race, the paddlers thrashing the water and canting their oars remind him of their first bout of lovemaking. And at a lantern festival, when the lanterns are hauled to the top of a post, the sound of the pulleys remind him of her moans during lovemaking.
These passages are remarkable in many ways. First, because the physical imagery is also explicit, so graphic, so strong. Second, because it indulges the strong emotions of love and sorrow, while Buddhism teaches the need to control strong emotions. Third, because this was a royal presenting himself as nakedly human in both a physical and metaphorical sense. In the 1480s, such a work was possible. It is one of only a handful of literary works surviving from that era, and is almost exactly a century before Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, and unlike anything penned in Thai since.
Another of this handful of early literary works is Lilit Pralaw, meaning the story of King Law. And Pralaw is the young king in a city-state. And Pern and Pang are princesses in a neighboring state, and they are all very, very beautiful. And they fall in love with one another solely through the descriptions of their beauty sung by traveling troubadours. At the climax of the poem, they meet and make love. But between their first mutual infatuation and the love scene, there are 3,000 lines of overcoming the obstacles in their way. This entails 3 bouts of magic, long negotiations to overcome the obstacles in their way, especially the objections of the king's powerful mother, a long journey through the forests and mountains, bribery to get through the frontier post, subterfuge for the princesses to escape their family's watchful eye, and the arrangement of a secret rendezvous.
The tryst, when it finally happens after this long build-up, is spectacular. First, there is a prologue. His 2 manservants and princess's 2 maids in a lotus pond pair off and make love in the pond, on the bank, and in the pavilion. Then sit outside the ensuing scene, struggling to keep their hands off one another. Through love burns them to ash. The tryst is, of course, a threesome. As in 12 months, the telling is very physical.
Entwining arms with arms in tight embrace, flesh pressed to flesh, oh, flesh, so soft and pressing flesh. Breast pressed to tender breast, belly pressed to belly, oh, soft belly, lovely breast. A lotus blooms, unfolding like a smile, a flower within a flower hid within a sacred lake. 1,000 pleasures in her lake. A fish frisks freshly, feels a lotus flower that blooms. Like a horse of senses 5, his power by passion multiplied, he pounds apace with no respite. He's like a tasker mad in must, with thrusting tusks and clutching trunk, clung close in clinch caress. After a short pause, there is a second round, and here their lovemaking disturbs the universe. Loud thunder blasts the heavens, shakes the skies. Earth quakes, is almost wrecked, and bellies churn. At sea, the roaring waves are whipped to foam. What wonders here? Trees yaw and sway all sides. A lion king is nuggling snug his lioness. A tusker jogs his mate to jig and play. A golden deer strides spryly forth to sport, while rabbits, squirrels gambol, couple, chase.
Hem Vechakon, the leading Thai illustrator of the mid-20th century, who drew series on the whole poem, captured this moment in a drawing quite unlike the rest of the series. But all is not over. The 3 bathe together in a large jar, which incites a little playfulness. They eat together, they part with great reluctance amid confessions of undying love. The whole tryst, from the prologue to the man with the servants to their final tearful parting, is about 700 lines, just half a Shakespearean play. Perhaps one of the longest such scenes in the world literature. There is then a tragic ending. with the strong parallels to Romeo and Juliet, in which the three main characters and their four servants are all dramatically killed.
But the point here is that in these examples of the very earliest surviving Thai literature, the focus is on love and desire. The treatment is graphic and often quite explicit. And these works celebrate strong emotions. Two others of this small number of early works, Nirat Haripunchai and Ocean Lament, are both about being parted from a lover on a journey, and they have the same focus on love, the same strong emotions, the same physicality, and some flashes of naked desire. And both were also probably written by royals. Now, let us move towards today.
If we look back at pre-modern Siam through the words and pictures that have survived from that time, we find love, sexuality, and desire treated as part of everyday life that can be portrayed in words and pictures. We find that the strong emotions of passion and despair can be included in these portrayals, that an open and even aggressive female sexuality is normal, and that female sexuality is not so constrained by age. What then happened on the journey from there to modernity?
Well, a lot, but we will just very quickly point out four things. First, Buddhism came to figure more in everyday life and public culture. The male monopoly on monkhood implicitly downgrades the moral and cultural status of the female. And modern Buddhist teaching stresses the importance of restraint. The Dhammapada, an eternally popular collection of short sayings of the Buddha, states, "The wise are controlled in bodily action, controlled in speech, and controlled in thought. They are truly well controlled."
Second, from the 17th century, a new absolute kingship emerged by association with the gods, and through a lot of ritual, kings became superhuman. At the same time, a form of patriarchy, modeled on polygamous warrior kings, spread downwards through the social ranks.
And third, large-scale migration from China, initially mostly of males, from a society which had long developed the subjection of women, legitimated polygamy beyond the noble elite, and gradually modified the local culture in multiple ways.
Fourth, the rise of the West just brought British Victorianism, which wanted to bury sexuality completely, and then middle-class mindsets which demand that female sexuality be severely constrained for the sake of the family. In short, patriarchy. This had a devastating impact on the example of cultural expression that we described earlier.
In the 19th century, artists continued to draw scenes of everyday life and risque humor in what murals, but these scenes were pushed to the edges or hidden in the corners and were called gak, dregs. They were looked down on. And today, local artists sometimes add such scenes, but immediately the Buddhist authorities quickly have them painted over.
12 months, the poems of passion and loss remain one of the most celebrated items of the old Thai literature until around 1920, after which it was quietly but completely suppressed and has only just re-emerged.
And Lilith Pralor, the romance with the spectacular tryst, has been reworked as novel, stage drama, and film more than any other old Thai work. But most versions downgrade the love scene or simply leave it out completely.
And Kun Chang Kun Pan, the popular traditional story, was partially rewritten by court poets in the 19th century and reinterpreted by court scholars in the 20th century. Where once it was a story celebrating strong females and warning them about the dangers of men, it has become a cautionary tale about the dangers of failing to control female sexuality. The heroine Wan Tong is now the model of a bad woman.
So by the late 20th and early 21st century, the gender landscape in Thailand was rather unusual. Women were very prominent, still are, in business, in the labor force as a whole, in higher education, a clear majority over men, and in the professions, including in traditional male preserves like law and engineering. But they were absolutely nowhere in two key areas. First, in anything to do with power, as village heads, in the upper levels of the civil service, or in politics, where women have never exceeded 15% of MPs. And this picture shows the launch of the current ruling party, and you have a bit of trouble, but spot the woman if you can. Second, in the management of the entertainment industries, women were again nowhere to be seen, and particularly in television, which was such a powerful force at the time.
This was a framework for a gender landscape which repressed female sexuality while allowing free range for men, which constricted portrayal of passion and which promoted an idealized image of passive womanhood. The Ministry of Culture campaigned against women wearing risque attire during the water splashing festival at Songkran. Meanwhile, the producers of TV soap operas favored stories in which women face tragedy for being too ambitious or aggressive, and which display violence against women, especially rape. It's a very common scene in the television. Feminist group, of course, campaigned against this with some successes, but what undermined this landscape was the LGBTQ movement, which is a rather remarkable story. Let's move forward to the end of the 20th century.
Gay figures had long had some prominence in Thai society. For instance, two prime ministers, Kukrit Pramod and General Prem, were widely known to be gay. But in society as a whole, the usual prejudices prevailed. This began to change in the 1980s and 1990s. A gay literature appeared, some locally produced, some translated from Japanese. Night venues appeared for meeting up. Magazines provided space for sharing experience and debate. And a whole new vocabulary was developed for naming and expressing the varieties of gender and sexuality. And a few pioneers appeared in the entertainment industry as models, comedians, and presenters. And the HIV pandemic gave rise to organizations that campaigned on gay issues. But the big change came around the millennium, around 2000, with a move from literary to visual culture. Artists portrayed LGBTQ themes, often playing with traditional imagery, eroticism, humor, and bodily beauty, especially Michael Shawanasai and Arunathai Somsagun's mischievous illustration of the Prat Law tale we described earlier. Then 3 films were big hits in the mainstream. Beautiful Boxer told the true story of a trans kickboxer who had already become a celebrity in real life. Iron Ladies told the story of a trans volleyball team. And Saving Private Tootsie was a comedy which gave starring roles to several pioneer gay figures in the entertainment industry.
Then in 2007, The Love of Siam told a teenage story which was very conventional in every way, except the pair were both very beautiful boys. It was a huge hit in Thailand and elsewhere in Asia. It appeared at a time when television was breaking free of terrestrial transmission, and thus also free of the old misogynistic entertainment industry. Love of Siam spawned a wave of films and TV series transmitted via satellite and the internet, Within a few years, this wave had introduced a whole new vocabulary, launched male cosmetics, and overhauled the ideals of male beauty. Against this background, organizations like the Rainbow Sky shifted from self-help work to demands for changes in law and public practice, leading to the first Gender Equality Act in 2015. And as election in 2019, the youth-based Future Forward Party selected many candidates from minorities, including several from LGBT groups, and 4 of them were elected. This dramatic, though very incomplete change in the public culture was achieved over 2 decades, though with a much longer lead up. It had impact beyond LGBT communities. When you break down borders, the whole structure becomes less rigid, more fluid, more malleable. And that was visible in the big demonstration over 2020 and 2021.
Political demonstrations usually have a cultural element. Protesters draw on cultural symbols and cultural forces to make their case. Also, challenges to political authority create openings to challenge cultural oppression too. The protests in 2021 were primarily against military rule. Why was Thailand to become an upper middle income country with high levels of tertiary education still under a political system, military rule, that the rest of the world had rejected a generation ago? Behind these protests was a simple but momentous change, the web and the mobile handset. The young people who grasped this technology so quickly and enthusiastically now had access to knowledge without the limits imposed by parents, by teachers, and by governments. After looking around the world, they asked, how come we still have this backward politics? And behind that question came others. Sorry. Why do LGBTQ still face legal restrictions? Why do students face so many rules about personal behavior? Why do women still face so much gender bias? In the street protests that exploded in mid-2020, a striking feature was not just the large number of students, but the large number of female high school students. And this photo shows a couple doing their homework. They want to overthrow the government and overthrow patriarchy, but you have to get the homework done too. Another feature in these demonstrations was the role of LGBTQ. One of the main early organizing groups, Free Youth, started out as an LGBTQ pressure group, and this element added glamour and humor to the protests. But there was another element that was perhaps more surprising, yet was powerful because it drew on the undercurrents buried deep in the culture.
Auntie Pao is a vendor. Her real name is Warawan Sa Eun, and she is about 70. She sells mango from a little handcart. She had joined the demonstration since the red shirt protests in 2009-2010. She says she is passionate about democracy, but also about poverty and inequality. She became famous for her verbal skills, her ability to attack the government or the police with colorful and incisive criticism and curses. Then in a demonstration on the 28th of September 2021, she took off her clothes. She later explained, the police were trying to surround and catch the demonstrators who were running away into a closed lane. I felt I had to do something to distract the police, so I took off all my clothes, and that let many people escape. She told the newspaper, several people have come to thank her afterwards. that they got away from the police because of her. Later, the police summoned her on a charge of possessing a weapon at a demonstration. She went to the police station, pulled up her skirt and said, "What weapon have I got? Nothing, only my sex organ. See?" These scenes recalled an image that almost every Thai knows because it comes from the culture's best known story, the Vasantara Jataka, which is illustrated in temples throughout the country. Vasantara Jataka is the most famous Buddha's episode of his life before he became Buddha, of his past life before he became Buddha. Some village women who want to show their displeasure at one of the characters do so by exposing themselves in one of the scenes in the Vasantara story. Auntie Pao's stripping also recalls the midwife stripping naked to scare away the spirits at the moments of death, of birth, as described earlier. This action draws on the power of suppressed female sexuality, and its power is somehow multiplied when the woman is a bit older. Auntie Pao took along a water gun to the demonstrations, targeted the genitals of the policemen. The police replied, "We don't mind you cursing us, but not spraying us with your water." Everyone could laugh at this, and the media had a field day, but she made a point. The police are using tear gas, water cannons, and rubber bullets to hit the young people. I am a Democrat. I'm not murdering anyone. I'm not trafficking in drugs. We go to demonstrate without even one needle. Her personal protests mobilized repressed female power against patriarchy, ordinary people against centralized authority, and in a youth-based movement, her age added to her power. She was arrested in August last year on charges of joining a gathering that risked spreading the pandemic. She is still on bail, awaiting trial.
By the end of 2021, these protests had been suppressed. However, this required a larger, stronger, and longer exercise in repression than almost ever before. Around 2,000 people have been arrested and charged, and most of these are young people, including almost 300 who are minors, who are aged below 18, mostly 16 and 17, and including a very high proportion of women. Some face multiple charges which could jail them for several lifetimes. They are very brave people who have put their lives and their futures at risk. Whatever the short-term result, the things said, things seen, and things done in these protests have changed something in the public culture. In the last few years, very noticeably, women have become much more prominent in public space as filmmakers, as columnists, rappers, editors, politicians, protesters, reporters, and lawyers. There are a lot more strong women in public space than before.
Now we come to the conclusion. Desire is so powerful. It underlies great writing and great art through the ages. It is often denied because its power clashes with other forms of power. But it defies such effort of denial, often in surprising ways. Thank you for listening to us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pasuk. Thank you, Chris. That was such a scintillating lecture and a fantastic journey through the many hundred years of Thai history. We have some time for a little Q&A session. So it's also time for everyone to also have a think about, questions they might want to ask the speakers. But maybe I'll do the first lead-in. So I think everyone might be really quite curious about how you both came from your respective domains in the social sciences to do literary translations. So maybe it's a good opportunity to introduce the books, that you have translated. Maybe you have the slides, please.
We've got it here. I think we're up. Well,
Yes.
Yes, okay. This is just to show, if you're interested, some of the sources that have gone into this talk. This, with this extraordinary illustration, Wat Chong Non Si in Bangkok, it's unfortunately almost impossible to get into. We were very lucky to get a chance to go and see it 2 years ago. But there is a book with all these murals in it, but also very difficult to get. It was published in 1982 and never reprinted. I haven't managed to buy a copy anywhere either. Kunchang Kunpan, this wonderful epic we translated, which was published in 2010. It looks huge here. It's 2 volumes, but actually you only need the first volume. And we also published an abridged version of it, bringing it down to 300 pages. That's good. The murals we showed a lot of. They are at Wat Balelai in Supanburi, which features in the poem of Kunchang Kunpan. And they were painted by this man, Mung Sin Janchai, who's a rather good mural painter. And he also did wonderful illustrations for us, which appear in those 2 big books of Kunchang Kunpan. These 2 dramatic, erotic poems, The 12 Months, this long one I read at the first, and Lilit Pralor, which has that beautiful video, we have translated both of those into English for the first time, and they came out in a book from Silkworm Books called Kings in Love in 2020. Came out the moment that COVID hit, so it completely died. We posted off something like 20 or 30 copies to friends who'd helped us around the world, and only one of them ever survived. It's when the whole international postal system collapsed. And then these wonderful, these amazing demonstrations in 2020. This picture is actually in the 4th edition of our History of Thailand, which we launched just a few weeks ago. There's one other thing I was going to mention. What was one? Anyway, I think that's enough. So that's the one. Oh yes. So our books are mostly available on Silkworm Books. Yeah.
Maybe you want to tell the audience about how you both came into the act of wanting to translate Thai literature. And I think this is also an opportune moment to say that in your acts of translation, you have endeavored to reinstate a lot of material that has been edited out because I guess the powers that be found them problematic or immoral.
Okay. Both of us were people who have always enjoyed literature. It was as simple as that. So it's not surprising we got into doing this. But really, at some point, almost 20 years ago now, I just wanted to read Kunchang Kunpan because I heard about it and how wonderful it was. And there was no way to read it without translating it. So I decided that we should translate it. And I would need Pasuk's help. I couldn't do it on my own. So I sort of felt that she's never going to say no. It's this great, huge work. It's going to take years and years and years. So I sort of took a long time getting up the courage to ask her. And finally I sort of mumbled and said, I'm thinking of we should translate Kunchang Kunpan. Now, what do you think? And I was expecting a long fight. And she said, yes.
Well, I'm trained as an economist. But actually, when I was younger, at the high school, I want to write. I'm not sure what I want to write, but I want to write stories about lives of people surrounding me in a village and contrast to Bangkok and things like that. That's what I felt. I want to do it, and I want to have the Chao Phraya River as the main theme of coming down from here and coming down to Bangkok and what the lives of the people are like. But of course, fate. You never. Or another thing I want to do, I want to be a dancer. But then I got a scholarship at that time when Thailand was sort of moving ahead with the US, wanting it to become
Developing country.
A developed country to stop the rise of communism in the area. And they gave, and the British and Australia gave a lot of scholarship to people to become economists. And I won the scholarship. And so that was the end of my dream to be a writer. And I also like to read a lot, different kind of tales and novels and things. And so when Chris said, let's do the Kun Chang Kun Pan together, I said, why not? So that's how I now have two lives. One life of a political economist, and the other life is doing all these things. But more and more, I'm shifting towards the latter. I'm going to abandon the first one, but I can't abandon it really. There is an issue of welfare of people that I felt being trained as a public economist, economist with a social conscience and with orientation towards improving the welfare of the people through public policies. So a branch of economics that I do a lot is about welfare, how to improve the welfare of the people through various means. Thank you.
But maybe it's also a good chance to segue to talk about the books themselves and also the visual material that are embedded together with the translated books. And there's an interesting backstory of Kun Chang Kun Pang, the famous epic poem that you've translated. And the previous edition had the painting, the suggestive painting by Chakraban Poshayakrit. Yes, and to me, when I first encountered it, was I had an episode of misapprehension because I actually thought that the picture showed Kun Pang with one tongue, but actually the woman is the other consort of his love rival. So in fact, the scene was a kind of an erroneous, I guess, entry for me. And I think most people would assume, because the title is Kun Chang Kun Pang, that the two people on the cover are Kun Chang Kun Pang. But in fact, Kun Chang Kun Pang are the two male love rivals.
Well, I can. It's such a. Can we go back? Can we run it again and just go to the image? The image. I think it's the second image on this set. Okay. Okay. Let's go. Yes, this one. This incredible. I mean, this is oil painting. Jakapan is probably one of the most famous kind of very traditional style painters. He's totally unmodern painter. So you can see here, he's drawn as a Greek god, and she's sort of drawn as a pre-Raphaelite lady. This is an example. I remember when our publisher, Trasawin from Silkworm Books, she just sent through this mock-up cover one morning, and we'd been sweating over trying to find a good cover for this painting, for this book. And suddenly she sent this one through, and I just fell off my chair, this fantastic image. But then what is also interesting is that she's lying here with her breasts exposed. And this is an example that, as Adele said just now, this poem was greatly edited and changed in the 19th century. And this is part of this, suppressing of female and suppressing eroticism and everything else. So it was rewritten, particularly and re-edited by Prince Damrong in the early 20th century, and bits rewritten earlier. And in fact, most of what we use today in the presentation, the bit about their early meeting and so on and so forth, does not appear in Prince Damrong's edition. All the stuff that's too sexy, he had broomed it out. But we went back and found as much as what we could of what had existed before his editing. And also it was interesting that in this scene here, if you read his edition, it's very clear she's clothed, right, on her top. If you go back to the previous one, it's not so clear. She could very well be naked. So I thought, oh, that's clever. Jakapan must have known about these old, the old version. I thought that's, but actually, when he gave a lecture about 20 years ago when he talked about this painting, and he just said, no, his normal way would have been to draw the shape first and then put the clothes on over it. But he said after he'd drawn her like this, he liked it so much he left it that way.
Oh, on that point of humor, I just wanted to open it now to the floor. If you've got questions for Pasuk and Chris. Yes, I think there's a roving microphone.
Hi, my name is Pon Prom. I'm from Thailand.
สวัสดีค่ะ
I have a question about temple murals. Because Thailand has been under political tension for over a decade now, so if there is a new temple, what the murals in modern times would look like? Would it be as portraying the beautiful things in Thailand that is still preserved now, or do you think there will be scenes that police that there would be clashes and these sad scenes would be portrayed in the murals as well? So just some hypothetical question.
Yeah.
You're asking about the mural nowadays.
Nowadays,
Present time.
like if there is a new temple, for example, and there is an artist who is trying to depict what's going on in Thailand right now, do you think what the murals will contain?
Oh, let me tell you that there's this lady, this man who become a lady, and she's called Satang. And she became very famous because she became a personality through Facebook and social media as a transgender, right? And she played with things like orange as a good luck kind of thing, and the media pick it up and invite her on a television show, and she was playing around with this orange, which is associated with her as an image of a celeb, as it were, among some people. And one of the ordinary temple was repainting the mural, and the painter put her picture with her orange into one of the scene of other things, and of course everybody was excited about it, that she's represented in the temple as an acceptance, right, as an LGBT. And it went on for a little while, and then some people displeased about it, resentful about this, and came out to object and eventually forced the abbot to ask the painter to delete it and repaint the scene as something else, which is the traditional one. So that may tell you that if a new temple can be created, a lot of people would like to paint it differently from the traditional pattern. But there will always be a conflict, right? And we haven't got another one, another new temple to have a new mural yet.
And in fact, the series at Wat Balelai on Kun Chang and Kun Pen, which is a long series, there's about 50 panels all around the temple cloister. And the abbot commissioned these because he thought it would attract more people to come to the temple. But he also, after that, he got a lot of criticism from people in Suphanburi saying, this is not a religious story. In fact, it's quite a bad story in some ways. So why have you painted it on the walls? The abbot actually resisted this criticism and actually had even more of the panels painted after it. But again, there is this kind of moralistic pressure put on nowadays.
Mural painter can still find employment, like the person that we talked to tell you about, Muang Sing Janchai, wealthy person hire him to paint in temple, but they always say do the traditional one, and maybe the patron who pay for it will help choose what to appear. There's a tradition of what, but what he painted are something quite different. Instead of only the story about Jataka, he paint beautiful painting about the moon, the god of the moon, the god of the sun, for example. But still, it's still in the realm of traditions. It's not the everyday life.
Yes, I mean, he has some which are doing the cosmology in the traditional way, except it looks like Star Wars when you look at it. It's sort of, it's quite good. It's quite nice.
Any further questions for Chris and Pasuk? If not, I have another one, actually. I wanted to also discuss another aspect of the literary text that you've chosen to translate, which is that quite often they also have violent endings. So I wanted to spend some time to think about, the relations between sex and desire and also violence, because you also ended with, defiance and protest. How should we read this nexus of desire or sex and violence? And what lessons can we take away? So, like in the story of Kun Chang Kun Pang, which maybe you guys don't know, Wan Tong is actually sentenced to death by the king because she was asked to choose between Kun Chang and Kun Pang, and she couldn't. And because that was politically, the king saw it as, cause for political instability, she was executed. So, the lingering question that I have in my head is, what does Wan Tong's death achieve? Yeah. So I just wondered if you both might have some thoughts.
The Kun Chang Kun Pen it's very complicated because there was probably an original story which was local tradition and was performed locally for entertainment. And then it was it became so popular, people enlarged it and they added more scenes, and so it's like Homer, it's like the Odyssey. It becomes longer and longer and longer, and it also then at this stage it got taken away out of local culture into court culture, and that changed it again. And I think in the early version it was a rather simple tragedy in which this lady is caught between these two men, and somehow she dies, and then that is a very tragic ending. But after it's been converted into court culture, it becomes much more complicated, because Kunpan, the main male lead, her lover, is a rebel. He's really very much a rebel against the king. And also this competition over her between Kunpan and Kunchan creates all kinds of trouble for the king, because they have sort of private battles and so on and so forth. And in the end, it seems in this later version that the king condemns her to death as a convenient way to kind of deal with the problem, deal with the problem of this competition creating all this trouble, while keeping both Kunpan, who he needs as a soldier, and Kunchan, who is a rich man and a tax collector, who are useful to him, but telling them to, quieten down. So it becomes, in some ways, a very cynical kind of solution to that problem. Right? It's not read that way by Thai readers today, because they have been taught a version which was mostly written by Kukrit Pramod, and it's not there in the original book, but he wrote an interpretation of the poem back in the 1970s. And in that interpretation, she is killed because she's a bad woman. She's become a bad woman. She cannot decide between these two men. And this shows that this is uncontrolled sexuality, and therefore she is killed.
You can also interpret it in the modern day politics also, in this way that the supreme authority in the country has the supreme power, and your life in the end depends on this supreme power. So whatever you do, be mindful of that. And the Kunchan Kunpan, the original, it's been, I say, it's like Homer, it's oral literature. And the local people have also modified and changed it to entertain themselves. But when it was revised by the court, a lot of things also changed, and which become very political. And the violent scene is kept. They changed a lot of things, but they have not changed the violent scene. There is another version of Kunchan Kunpan in Laos, where I think it's interesting, the woman did not die, and somehow there's some reconciliation and no violent death. But the violent death is retained in Thailand. And you can also extend that to the present political situation. If you define authority, whether woman or man, you can be put in jail for life, or like what's happening now. And this is something which I think Thailand still have to liberate itself from this tradition.
So on that note of also entertainment, because you also brought it up in your lecture, I was also curious to know about the power of television. Because a lot of the, stories of love, sex, and desire are transmuted into television soap operas, in particular, of course, the lakon, right, in Thailand. So I wanted to ask if you also saw transformation or transformative potential in the mass media, in television, in terms of the stories of love and sex.
There is this, obviously the potential is there. But as we said in the talk, as long as the television was dominated, so basically controlled by the government and by the military, it was run by a lot of misogynistic men. And so these extraordinary soap operas which dominated, and I'm talking here between about 20 years ago, 30 years ago to about 10 years ago, of this long period of time, amazing number, which were all basically about suppressing women and about violence against women. And it wasn't until really in around 2007 and 2008, around that period, there was a strong feminist-driven objection to this prevalence of violence against women on everyday television. And I think since then, I mean, not only then the media got totally changed because this dominance by the military and the government and the control of 4 channels changed with digitalization. In 2011, they basically didn't free it up, but they went to many more channels and a much more competitive environment. And in that competitive environment, new providers came in producing soap operas. And since then, this strong misogynistic strain hasn't disappeared, but it's considerably less now. So, and I think there are many now which are written, made by women, and it's much different in what they're saying.
And I would also like to add, there's some people who wanted to rewrite the ending of Kun Chang Kun Pan as well. Some new artists, new playwright, sort of changed the ending of the Bon Tong did not die, or she,
That's another redemptive ending.
Yes,
for her.
and there's novels which have been written, sort of taking off from the which change these endings, and there's also we saw an absolutely wonderful dramatic performance done by a university drama group that when it got to this ending and the executioner was supposed to be killing her, he realized she's a pretty woman, so he takes her off instead, which was very funny.
So on that note of endings, I just wanted to do a last call for questions.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation and discussion. I wanted to go back to that moment where you introduced the anti-vendor protester, exposing herself, and you drew this wonderful connection with the exposures from centuries past.
Yeah.
At the beginning of your presentation, you said that you think there's nothing distinctively Thai or particular to Thailand about the things you were talking about. So I was curious, how would you explain this historical echo in the protester vendor's actions? Are you suggesting that she's aware of these historical precedents? Are you suggesting that it's something transmitted in some other form in the culture across the centuries, or how would you make sense of this recurrence?
Do you want to try that?
Well, some I notice. Okay, let me answer in this way. Of course, we're talking about Siam, so obviously we draw from this memory and history, but I also want to say that protests in Europe, you also see people going naked, right? Riding bicycle naked, or women and men went naked, walking on the street to protest against the violence, the government violence against the people or migrants. They do not need to draw on their tradition. But of course you can talk about the Canterbury Tale, uh, that has a character of the woman who is very open about her whatever. Of course, Papa remind me of that also. But of course, something in the culture is sort of Thai culture. It sort of seep into you without knowing, you know. Okay, that's the only thing I can. I haven't interviewed her yet.
You know, this business about this sort of covert power of aged female sexuality is very interesting in Thai. One of the images I wanted for this presentation but couldn't find one is in the northeast, in the northeastern region of Thailand. One of the great festivals of the year is a rocket festival, you know, where they shoot these rockets up into the clouds. It's a rain-making festival. And in the day before they shoot the rockets, they parade the rockets through the streets of the town. Now, this festival has been cleaned up in order to be marketed to tourists, but luckily we saw it before that happened, and it's wonderful. I mean, it's really, so it's absolutely outrageously sexy thing. But when they paraded those, these enormous, you know, phallic rockets through the streets in the town, out in front of them was a corps of aged ladies, you know, who were dancing in front of the rockets, and none of them were anything under 50, you know. And I think that's part of the same thing, you know, there's something there. But I suspect it's also why we say not specifically Thai, because this, you know, the power of females in the culture, in the popular culture, not the court culture, the popular culture before the modern age, I think was across the region. I think you find it in elsewhere within Southeast Asia.
Thank you. Was there one more question from the floor? David, yes.
Thank you both for a very entertaining presentation. I wanted to actually, wind back one step. When you were talking about the changing purchase that maybe female authors of one kind or another are having in the public culture, and that might trickle through to a less patriarchal public culture. It was, I think, very salutary in your talk that you show once again the necessity to go pre-Bangkok in order to answer some of these questions, that the solutions that you offer are culturally denominated rather than necessarily in politico-economic terms. I think this is, you know, incredibly liberating from an intellectual point of view. I just wanted to ask you to reflect, or whether you have anything to add, if we were to look back at, let's say, look into that pre-Bangkok history, rather than emphasizing the representation of female desire. If we look beyond representation and if we ask about the author function, and whether in your research you see the potential of different sorts of authorship in that pre-Bangkok history. I have in mind actually maybe tangentially here Ashley Thompson's book about engendering the Buddhist state, and the way that a sort of half hypothetical question about the authorship of an inscription permits a tremendous kind of amplitude in the reinterpretation of that tradition. So yeah, I mean maybe that's a too abstract way of putting it, but thanks.
It's a super question, but it's something that's so difficult to answer because, of course, we have almost no information about authorship. You know, we're left guessing. I mean, in all of these literary works that we are talking about, there is no title page with the name of the author and the date it is written, right? And in most cases, there's not even a title, so a lot of this has been filled in later. So we are guessing about this. But what we do know from secondary sources is that if you go down to the level of, not in the court culture, but down to the level of the popular culture, and particularly the business of singing, and this telling tales by singing, it was both genders. Typically, it was done through teams of men and women in counterpunctual singing back and forth. So we suspect from that there was a larger female presence in authorship of cultural material back in this period. But we don't know how much. And the problem is that, of course, since there has been this period, there was this period of total male domination developing over the 19th and much of the 20th century, you'll find now a lot of Thai male intellectuals completely deny any female role in anything. They say, it never happens, it was always all male. And this has become something that's become almost religious for such people to defend these kinds of views and reject all kind of female authorship.
Yes, I'd like to add, Chris, this belief among the intellectual and the educated in the art study in Thailand is that the female in history never had any role in this. It's so ingrained. And the reaction to when we discuss about this in one of a small group, one of the guy was outburst, came out as an outburst. There's no such thing as women knowing anything and can write any poems or can think of any poems. But I disagree entirely. I think the tradition, the local tradition of village level of talking in rhyme all the time from both male and female, particularly singers in the village, also tend, in the local drama, the female are also important, and there are some evidence of old recording of sepa, what we call kap sepa. It's sepa kun chang kun pan. It's got a special name, sepa, that the female there's a female lead singers in those records, but I think that record's been since been lost.
Can we talk about Zhong? Can I talk about?
Sorry.
Okay. There's if you look at other Thai groups, Thai outside Thailand, particularly the Zhuang in southern China, which is a Thai group very closely related to the Thai in Chiang Mai. And recently, there's quite a revival of their literature, and there's an academic in Taiwan, David Holm, who has published several things, and most recently, just a couple of months ago, a translation of a song, which is called the Brigand's Song. And it's an amazing story of soldiers, people in this Thai community being recruited as soldiers to go and fight for the local lord, and going on a campaign, and all of their trials and troubles, and then coming back to their... but the way it's told, and the way it's still sung to this day, and it's sung by a pair of men and a pair of women. And it's in four-line verses, male, female, all the way through. And it's absolutely delightful to read. And even, you know, they start off with the men leaving and all the sadness of them leaving home. But then, when the men are away, and they're talking about what they did when they were away at war, the females are still there. They still have the counterpoint, and they become kind of archly critical of what the men are doing. And it's just delightful. But you can imagine that there was this very strong sort of equal gender roles in this kind of production elsewhere within Thai communities. I think more will be found.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your questions and responses. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, and so would you all kind of give a hand to Chris and Pasuk for today?
Thank you very much for coming. Thank you. Thank you. Great.
And I just want to say that their books are all available at the National Library if you want to look them up. And we also have our own, at the National Gallery's library, we also have our own copy of Kunchang Kunpang, but unfortunately without the sexy painting of Chakraban.
Chakraban.
Yeah.
Okay.
And please do also join us for the second part tomorrow at the same time, where we have the performance lecture by Zarina Muhammad and Tini Aliman. And we will also come together for a closing discussion. Thank you, everybody.